Hello, my name is Rose Marcario. I'm a partner at ReGen Ventures and the former CEO of Patagonia. It's my great honor to introduce Al Gore, the chairman of Generation Investment Management. Al, it's so great to be with you today at Upfront.
Well, thank you very much, Rose, and welcome everybody. Thank you for inviting me here. I'm really glad to be here, and I'm particularly glad to be interviewed by Rose Marcario, who is maybe my favorite CEO of all time. And at 12 years running Patagonia, she had a lot to work with, a good founder, a good team and everything, but took it up to a $1 billion market cap and became kind of the gold standard for responsible business. So we've been friends a long time, and I'm a huge fan, Rose.
Oh, Al, it goes, it's Mutual Admiration Society. But the last time we were on stage together was at a Generation event in 2018, talking about sustainable investing. And so much has changed since then.
Yeah.
And I think those of us who care about the climate crisis are really focused on how do you deploy capital toward a more livable future, toward a just transition. And Generation has always been an example of sustainable investing to all of us. I'm curious, as we sit here 5 years later with so much at stake, with the crisis writ large on every continent, do you feel more or less hopeful?
Well, I'm temperamentally optimistic, and I choose to be optimistic about solving the climate crisis. And I think the optimism, for me, isn't forced, but it is predicated on the assumption that the momentum we've been gathering will continue to build, and that we will move ever faster. Business plays a big role, and I want to thank the Upfront Ventures folks for putting all this on, and I want to acknowledge my team members who are here. Lila Preston is my partner in charge of the growth equity business at Generation Investment Management. Annie Wang is here, and Sam Orley. And we started almost 20 years ago, and our vision was to prove the business case that fully integrating sustainability, climate, and all the rest into every part of the investing process could lead not just to adequate returns, but could lead to outperformance. And we made a bet that the world was beginning, and this gets to your question about optimism and pessimism, we made a bet that the world was beginning to move in an impressive way into this sustainability revolution, which we believe is going to have the scale of the Industrial Revolution coupled with the speed of the digital revolution, as more and more business leaders and their stakeholders of all sorts and customers want more climate-friendly businesses and want more efficiency, and at a time when the new digital technologies, supercomputers, now of course AI and machine learning and even blockchain and other technologies, including in the bio realm, give businesses, many businesses, the ability to manage electrons and protons and atoms and molecules and proteins and genes with the same proficiency that the IT businesses have demonstrated in managing bits. And we made a bet that the world was going to be moving in that direction, and it has. And that's one of the reasons for my optimism. I'll give you a quick example. Last year, calendar 2022, if you look at all of the new electricity generation installed worldwide, 90% of it was renewable. And of that 90%, how much was privately financed? 86%. Now, one of the problems, maybe we can come back to it, is that developing countries have not had the same access to private markets. But business is moving now. And we have seen a stunning cost reduction, 90% in the last 20 years. Solar electricity has gone down 90%, wind electricity down 70%, and batteries, EVs, 15% of all the cars bought last year were EVs. Norway's at 50%. All the auto companies and truck companies are shifting over. So that is cause for optimism. I'm also optimistic because in August of this year, at long last, the United States of America passed major climate legislation, the biggest and best climate legislation any country in the entire world has ever passed. It is the real thing. There's some warts on it. There's some things in it that I don't like, for sure. But for every 1 ton of emissions increase, there are 28 tons of emission decreases. And in a representative democracy where compromise is usually pretty necessary, that's a pretty good ratio of compromise. 1 month later, we saw Australia finally change its government and adopt a climate-friendly approach, and they are really moving there forcefully. And then 1 month after that, we saw Brazil finally get rid of the Trump of the tropics and put in a new, I didn't originate that phrase, I thought that was pretty a common moniker. But anyway, now Lula is back, and he's back with a climate commitment and saving the Amazon. So those are all really good things. And they make me optimistic. There are some real dangers that we're facing. Emissions, for example, are still going up. Yeah. And we're still seeing taxpayers around the world forced by governments to subsidize the burning of fossil fuels. $1 trillion last year, subsidizing the destruction of humanity's future. And so that's a problem. And the legacy networks of political influence and wealth that the fossil fuel companies have built up over more than 100 years are used constantly to try to slow down progress, and they want to define methane as a renewable source of energy. It's asinine, you know, it's way more powerful than CO2 in trapping heat, and that's a long story. We can't go into all of it, but I choose to be optimistic, and I think the evidence supports the optimism, but again, it's predicated on the assumption we're going to continue to move forward. And I'm here, by the way, not just to present things, I'm here to recruit you. We need help. We seriously need help. And if you're not seized of this issue yet, you wait a year or two. It just is moving so fast.
Al, can you talk a little bit about, you talked a little bit about the origin story of Generation, but also maybe more specifically about the growth equity team, because I know Lila's here today and her team is here today, and what they focus on and sort of your process for looking at investments and the lens with which you view the work that you're doing.
Yeah, so back almost 20 years ago, David Blood was the CEO of Goldman Sachs Asset Management, and I had left the White House involuntarily in January of 2001.
But peacefully.
Peacefully, yes. Yeah. I barely kept my dignity together. But I was offered a job in the asset management business, and as is common for people who've spent a lifetime in public service, they throw the salary number out. You say, what, are you kidding? Is there an extra zero on that? So I did that, and I didn't really enjoy it. Great people, but it was just about making the money. And so when that gig was about to end up, I'd been fortunate in the digital space to make some money. And so I went looking for an asset management firm that would have my values, found one that might, and in the course of diligence went to Goldman Sachs, and Phil Murphy, who's now governor of New Jersey, said, you know, I've got a partner, David Blood, he's thinking of leaving because he wants to pursue something like this. And we got together, and that's how we started. Now, and we set up a whole team to prove that business case I mentioned, and then it started being successful. I'm knocking on wood. Because it's one day at a time. But we started throwing off enough original research that there was a lot of it that was clearly very valuable that we couldn't monetize in the global equity long-term space. And that's when we decided to establish the growth equity business. We're in our fourth fund now. Lila Preston, as you mentioned, is running it. This fourth fund is $1.7 billion. We've had a lot of great companies, Nest, DocuSign, Toast, Asana, Remitly, et cetera. We've got some really great companies that we're active with right now. And it's really the same principle, integrating sustainability into it, but doing it in the growth space. And even though, Upfront Ventures is more early stage, but we follow early stage companies when they get close to the point where they're going to get into the growth stage. And then we may do, a dozen site visits before we invest. We're really research intensive. And by the way, I'll make this final point on this question. When you have values like trying to solve the climate crisis and make the world a better place, it is so much easier to attract the best and brightest young women. And you found that at Patagonia for sure.
For sure.
And easier to retain them. And they it just makes it so easy to give all your energy into it because you feel like it's not just about making money. We want to make money for sure, and we especially want to make money for our clients. But we want to do it in a way that makes the world a better place. And so the growth business came out of the long-term global equity business.
And I know you could look at things through sort of a lens, and it's always difficult to define impact, right? And measure impact. And I know you look at things through a lens which is sort of like system positive, I think you call it.
Right.
Yeah. So can you give me a couple of examples of that in reality? Like, how do you define system positive?
Yeah, system positive is the phrase we use particularly in the growth business. If it's consistent with making all the elements of the community it's part of better, then it's positive for the system. I'll give you a couple of examples that we have that we're working with right now. One is a company called Pivot Bio. It uses the biology revolution to come up with microbes that you can dunk seeds into the microbes, and then you don't have to use the synthetic nitrogen fertilizer because the plants that grow from those seeds, they're colonized by these microbes that then work with the microbiome in the soil and create their own nitrogen. You can take one gallon of this liquid microbial bath, and it replaces a whole railroad boxcar full of synthetic nitrogen fertilizer. Wow. Synthetic nitrogen is made 95% from methane. They call it natural gas. That was a marketing term from the 1920s. It should be fossil gas or methane gas. And that's what washes off the soil into the creeks, the rivers. That's what creates the dead zones in the ocean that are growing, pollutes the groundwater with nitrates. I mean, in Iowa, you have the city of Des Moines suing the farmers in Iowa. It takes a big prompt for Des Moines to sue farmers, I'm telling you. But it's because the drinking water so that it's system positive to replace all that polluting synthetic nitrogen with a benign microbial. It cuts the farmers' costs quite a bit. It is positive in every way. Another example would be a company called Weka, W-E-K-A, which is an artificial intelligence company that is based on a green blueprint to really reduce the energy use. And by the way, AI is much in the conversation everywhere these days. And just like crypto, people have been a little bit late in focusing on the energy consumption of all this because you have enormous energy use. But in AI, a green AI processing company is system positive. It accommodates the growth in AI, which is obviously going to come, without increasing the carbon footprint in the way it otherwise would.
Yeah, that's really interesting about the energy use and of all this AI technology. Pivot Bio is a good example of something we care a lot about mutually, which is soil health and how soil impacts planetary health and human health, as you just talked about. And from my standpoint, from environmental natural diversity. And so I'm interested for you to make that link for people between the need for innovation and regenerative practices, that the reason it's so important when it comes to the climate crisis and why it's such an important aspect of the solution kit.
Yeah, well, thank you. Provisions at Patagonia is a great food marketplace. People often underestimate the role of agriculture and the food system in the climate crisis. You hear a lot about livestock agriculture and methane from burping cows and sheep and so forth. But actually, between 25 to 30% of all the greenhouse gases still comes, the category is land use and land use conversion. So it's a little tricky. About 13% of it is behind the farm gate, which is still a lot. But there's a lot of research being done. Just 3 ounces of seaweed in a cow's diet can cut the methane 85% if it's the right kind of seaweed. And I'm not going to vouch for all the science. We're still learning about it. But it was not until the year I entered Congress, 1977, that agriculture was no longer the #1 source of CO2 in the atmosphere, because the metal plow tore up the prairies and made soil highly vulnerable to wind erosion and water erosion. And then the Haber-Bosch process, which is where the synthetic nitrogen fertilizer came from, also contributed quite a lot. And so it's down to a lower percentage now overall than it used to be. But here's the most important fact. There is more carbon in the first meter of topsoil around the world, 3 times as much as in all of the trees and all of the vegetation put together. When I was a little boy growing up summers on our family farm where I live now, my father taught me how to find the best soil, and I remember holding this black, moist soil in my hand, and I'm embarrassed it took me another 50 years before I understood why it was black. That's the carbon. And it's moist because the carbon supports the rich networks of life. Rose is part of this new group called the Society for the Protection of Underground Networks, mycorrhizal fungi networks. If you don't know about it, it's an amazing story, and thank you for letting me know a lot that I didn't know about it. But the magic in farming, when it's done correctly, is not to just tear everything up and kill everything except what you want to grow there and then dump on the pesticides and the fertilizer and everything. The magic is the symbiotic relationships in the soil make the plants healthier, more nutrient rich, and more sustainable, because you keep doing this, the synthetic nitrogen and the chemicals. It's like steroids. There's a price to pay, and the land pays the price. All the life forms in the soil get killed a lot of times, and then the yields start going down.
Yeah, Rachel Carson warned us about that, right? I mean, you know, it's crazy when you think about where we are today and how much synthetic, nitrogen, and how many pesticides are poured onto the land in the U.S. especially. It's terrifying, actually, when you really dig into it. Al, when I was at Patagonia, I worked a lot on climate justice, and I'm curious how you think about equity at Generation, and just in a more broad way in terms of the climate crisis and the challenges we face toward a just transition.
Yeah, in the last dozen years, it has become climate justice and equity have been interwoven with the struggle to solve the climate crisis, and it's as it should be. when I was in the Senate, I teamed up with the late John Lewis to author the first environmental justice legislation. John introduced it in the House, I introduced it in the Senate. And then a year later, when I became vice president, I was able to get President Clinton to put it in as an executive order. Years earlier, in the late 70s, early 80s, I had hearings on hazardous chemical waste, and it led, along with other things, to the establishment of the Superfund, which gave the first metrics of where all these hazardous chemical waste sites and dumps were. And it was only then that researchers like Bob Bullard down at Southwestern and others saw the evidence that could prove what they already knew, that these hazardous facilities are being placed in black and brown communities, way more than would be random. I mean, for goodness sake, you have downwind from the smokestacks, downstream from the liquid hazardous waste flows, people who have been deprived of sufficient political and economic power to push back and say, no, you know, this needs to be better done. They're the ones that have suffered the brunt of this. And by the way, it gets to this offsets question. Yeah. Because if you go to like Southwest Memphis, they have a big Valero refinery dumping, they have a 5x cancer rate. They tried to put an oil pipeline right through this 97% black community. One of these companies say, oh no, we're good. We planted a bunch of trees in Bolivia. Oh, really? Okay. Am I still breathing this stuff? Yes. So this is one example, Rose, of how the environmental justice community has informed the larger climate community and created new and better understandings. I'll tell you something else. From my previous lifetime in the political world, the moral standing of the civil rights movement, when trained on these environmental aspects of equity and justice, brings something altogether different and more powerful to the climate movement writ large. You get the passion, you get the dedication. It was already there, but it's bigger and better now. And we're going to win this. We're going to win this, okay? The remaining question is whether we'll win it in time. That's really the risk that we're running now.
How do you think we're doing with our response to climate? What worries you the most right now? What's your biggest concern when you look out at the activity that's happening? And I know you're excited about the Inflation Reduction Act. So am I. There are lots of good reasons to be optimistic. But what's your biggest concern about our response?
It's not enough yet. It's not enough. And every legislative battle, whether at the city level, the county level, the state level, provincial level, national or international level, every single battle, the fossil fuel industry is in there with lawyers and lobbyists and campaign contributors, and they are fighting tooth and nail to stop any progress that people propose, whatever level of government they're fighting. So that's really the main problem.
Yeah, they're choking out innovation, right? I mean, they're choking out the innovation. Yeah.
Yes, they are. Yeah. And of course, some of them, particularly ExxonMobil, for example, some of them have lied on an industrial scale. I mean, Naomi Oreskes and Pat Conway wrote the beautiful book, Merchants of Doubt, about proving, chapter and verse, all the footnotes of how the fossil fuel industry went to the tobacco companies and got their blueprint, and many of the same PR professionals, many of the same people show up. And what the tobacco industry did, and most of you will know this, if not, you can Google the TV commercials that they used to have. They'd have doctors in white coats smoking cigarettes and comparing their brands. When the Surgeon General's report famously came out and said smoking is linked to high death rates from lung cancer and so forth, they hired actors and dressed them up as doctors and got them on television to lie on a constant basis. That's, in essence, what the fossil fuel industry did. And of course, in the case of ExxonMobil, they found the internal documents, sort of like Fox News, you know. They say one thing publicly and something altogether opposite in private. They knew the facts. Their scientists were really good. I know some of them. They're really good. And they told the board of directors and the CEOs exactly what the stakes were. And they said, no, it'll cost us money if we operate on the basis of truth. We're going to lie to people and tell them there's no problem so we can continue using the sky as an open sewer for as long as we can make money at it. That's the real problem we face. The climate crisis is a fossil fuel crisis in political terms. So that's the problem we face. Now, luckily, more and more people are becoming aware of how high the stakes are. And by the way, I don't think that's primarily due to activists like me, although I think a lot of activists have done a good job, but Mother Nature is the most powerful communicator about the climate crisis. Has the weather been a little weird around here lately, by the way? It has in Tennessee. It was 86 degrees in Tennessee a few days ago in February.
Yeah, it's incredible to just watch, even in the last year, everything that's happened around the globe, or in terms of, you know, bizarre weather events. But I'm curious, Al, you know, when I was at Patagonia, I focused a lot on advocacy and our company having a voice and a vocal and taking vocal stances on issues that we cared about. Because I think it's very important for business to be vocal now. We're running out of time. We don't have time to live in the gray area anymore. We need to speak out. And you've always been really dedicated to education with films like An Inconvenient Truth and the mobilization work you're doing with Climate Reality Project and now Climate Trace, which is an incredible mapping platform. How do you keep going, you know, in the face of this, you know, existential threat and this crisis, and keep doing the work that you're doing?
Well, thanks for your kind words. I have great partners at Generation, and it's, as you know from your long experience in business, when you have just fantastic people to work with who share your values and are committed to getting the job done right, then it makes it a joy. And where the work on climate overall is concerned, I sometimes get asked some version of this question: doesn't it make you tired? Don't you get exhausted and burned out and so forth? Actually, it gives me energy. Of course, there are times when you need a little R&R, of course. But the task itself, I never dread going back to it, ever. Because it gives me the feeling that it completely and totally justifies pouring every ounce of energy I have into it. And I don't know how to describe it. It gives me a feeling that I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing. And that may sound arrogant, I don't know, I hope not, because it's not. It doesn't feel that way to me. It feels like, you know, it's like, you know, everybody has that little voice. If something is you're gonna make a mistake or something, it's always a mistake to ignore that little voice. Well, if you're doing what feels right to you and the evidence around you suggests that it's really making some progress, then it's like, yeah, let's do some more of that. It's a privilege. It is an absolute privilege to have work that makes you feel that way.
Yeah, work with purpose. I mean, that to me is everything, and what we should all be focusing on, especially in the next couple decades. Al, I'm curious. You know, we're all here. We're all working on issues. I'm working almost completely on climate solutions now. And what advice do you have for us what kind of charge do you have for us as we face these big intractable problems?
Well, thank you for the question. And I would say to this audience, it's varied, I know, lots of different experiences, lots of different companies, lots of different investing approaches. Whatever you're doing, try to be conscious of the climate dimensions of it. When you reduce emissions, you find that it's almost like putting on a pair of magic glasses where you can see waste that was invisible until you started focusing on the greenhouse gas. CO2 is invisible, tasteless, odorless, and has no price put on it, so it's easy to ignore it. But when you find ways to focus on it, it makes your business more efficient. If you don't know a lot about the climate crisis, I would urge you to learn more about it. It's going to dominate the rest of our lives for all of us. See, you know, in the simplest terms, you've seen these pictures of from space where the Earth is turning toward the sun and there's this thin blue line. That's a shell, of course. It's blue because that's where the oxygen is. That thin blue line is just 5 to 7 kilometers thick. It's so thin. And if you could drive a car straight up in the air at interstate highway speeds, you get to the top of that blue line in about 5 minutes. And below you would be all of the oxygen and all of the greenhouse gases. That thin sphere is what is what we're using as an open sewer for 182 million tons of heat-trapping, man-made global warming pollution spewing into it every single day. And the cumulative amount that it stays there, molecule for molecule on average about 100 years, and it builds up. And the amount that's there now traps as much extra heat as would be released by 600,000 Hiroshima-class atomic bombs exploding every day on the Earth. It's of course hard for me to wrap my mind around that much energy, but that is what is making the ocean so hot. That's what's evaporating so much more water vapor into the sky and feeding these atmospheric rivers that come over the land. And that's why you get these rain bombs and snow bombs and mudslides. And the same extra heat is what pulls the moisture out of the soil much more quickly. So you get this weird pattern where you have downpours and floods and then droughts that seem never to end. And our biggest reservoirs are near dead pool status now. The Po River, the Rhine River, the Loire River, the Mekong, Mississippi, you can go around the world. We're really in trouble because of all this extra heat. And that's what's also melting the ice. And it's making the conditions in many areas, more and more areas of the tropics, literally unlivable because the combination of heat and humidity exceeds the level where people can survive. They cool down their cores after 2 hours, you're done for. And so that's stimulating these flows of refugees. Just look at the xenophobic politics that came out of a few million refugees coming to the southern border of the U.S. and in other countries. We've had this populist authoritarianism in Hungary and other places. Now Italy's got a little taste of it. Imagine, the Lancet Commission says there may be 1 billion climate refugees in this century if we don't act. 1 billion climate refugees? That would take away our capacity for self-governance if the previous experience applies to the future where nativists and xenophobes say, you know, they're the cause of all our problems. So for those and other reasons, we have to act. We have to do more. We've got momentum now. We've got legislation, tax credits, subsidies, etc., and more countries are getting on board. But it's still not enough because the problem is still getting worse faster than we're deploying the solutions. Mm-hmm. They're available. They're better for us in every way. They create jobs. They reduce the pollution. They save the future. Harry Truman once said as president, he said, I spend 95% of my time as president trying to convince people to do what they damn well ought to be doing in their own self-interest anyway. And climate activists often feel that way. And of course, the fossil fuel companies are the big obstacle, as I said before. But to finish my answer, please, I'm here to recruit you, as I said. Please help. And there are ways everyone can help, particularly if you're an investor or in the business world. Business is going to play one of the key roles in solving this crisis.
You've heard it straight from Al Gore. Al, thank you for spending this time. This is an incredible chance to sit down and have a chat about all this stuff. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rose. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Upfront.